All right. So welcome everyone to Postpartum Recovery and the Aerialist. I'm Lauren, and just a little bit about me. I live here in Seattle, Washington. I am an aerial coach, a Pilates instructor, and a personal trainer. I've been coaching for about a decade and teaching Pilates and doing more training stuff for 6 or 7 years at this point, maybe a little longer. I am also a mother. My darling son is actually turning 22 years old today. So I clearly had a child when I was very young, and I was not an aerialist at that point. So in that respect, my experience is probably different than yours, but you know, still something we have in common. I have also done specific training and education around postpartum recovery. So even though my pregnancy and postpartum recovery was pretty easy and I didn't have any sort of long-term effects for the most part, I have done specific training around it, and I've worked with a number of postpartum people around their recovery. So today we are going to talk about a bunch of different stuff. This is a huge topic, and I'm going to try to cram as much information into it as I can without getting too into the weeds. So still trying to keep this information super accessible for you. We'll see how long it takes. I'm hoping it's 60 to 90 minutes, but I have no idea. We'll find out together, and you guys will all get the replay if you need to leave. Hopefully I am not done speaking to just myself. So if you have a question, because there might be quite a few people on this call all at the same time, if you have a question, you can either type your question into the chat box, and I've got it pulled up. So I'll just see them as they show up. Or you can just say like, hey, I have a question, and I can pull you up on screen to ask your question, or if you have something that you want to show me. But do know that I am going to share this recording publicly on YouTube, just so that it is easier for me to disseminate this information, because a lot of people are really interested in it. So just be aware of that. It's a consideration for you about whether or not you want to be shown on the recording. All right, so I think that's all the kind of housekeeping stuff. So we're gonna dive right in, and we're gonna get started with just a little bit of anatomy, because I think that it's super helpful to understand anatomy so we can talk about what's going on. So I am going to share my screen, and we're gonna take a look at some stuff, and then we're going to start talking about pregnancy first, because there was a lot of questions about pregnancy. I'm going to try to go over that stuff relatively quickly so we can dive into postpartum considerations. So let's take a look at some muscles. All right. So here we have the torso, right? This is going to be weird and slow. So there we go. Come back. So we have all this space here when you're pregnant is going to get filled by a baby. Sorry, this is making, the Zoom call is making my this program run really slowly. At the bottom of our ribs here, we have a diaphragm. And at the bottom of the pelvis, we have a pelvic floor right now, which is just a hole, but we'll look at that separately. And then we have a whole bunch of muscles in the middle here. We have external obliques. We have, we'll hide that guy. We have our rectus abdominis and internal obliques. Let's hide those. And we have a transversus, right? So those are all our abs. And we have a linea alba, which is this piece of connective tissue. This is important, which is why I talk about it. So this linea alba connects from your sternum all the way down to your pubis, and it's what your abdominals connect to on the front, right? So that's where they all insert. And if you have a diastasis or a diastasis, either is correct. That's where it is. So when you're pregnant, all of this space gets filled with baby and everything else gets pushed out of the way, which means your ribs get pushed out, right? Because there's all this pressure up. So your ribs get pushed open, your diaphragm gets stretched out. All of these muscles of your abdominals get pushed that way and get really stretched. They basically spend, 6 months stretched under tension. And then your pelvic floor down here, also tons of pressure down there. If you think about what's happening in your body, these muscles here in your low back tend to get shortened, right? We tend to end up with a little bit of extra arch in our low back, and likewise a little bit of extra curve in our upper back. And then let's take a look at the pelvic floor really quick. So here is your pelvic floor. There's a whole bunch of muscles in your pelvic floor. It's super complicated, really interesting if you get nerdy about these things. We're not going to talk about them too specifically, but I did want to take a look at your hip stabilizers. So these are all your external rotators. And this is your pelvic floor. And I just wanted to point out that they moosh together. So like this muscle right here that's highlighted is an external rotator, but look at where it inserts basically in the pelvic floor. So I'm pointing this out just to say that pelvic floor function and hip function are very interconnected. And I think this is the anus. So this is maybe where your baby would come out. But whatever, that doesn't matter so much. What matters is that there's a bunch of muscles down there and they all do jobs and they are connected to your hips. And during pregnancy, if you have dysfunction in your pelvic floor, it might also be connected to dysfunction in your hip. And we'll talk more about that later. All right, stop sharing. Come on. Sorry. Zoom is being really slow. There we go. You gonna do it again? All right, I'll keep talking and hopefully this will let me stop sharing in a moment. Okay, so what happens in pregnancy? We get all filled up with baby and our muscles get really stretched out. We lose some function in our diaphragm. And generally everything gets shoved out of the way until your baby comes out. So one of the questions that I got a lot of is, can you prevent future diastasis during pregnancy? And the hard answer to that is that there is no way to know whether or not you will have diastasis postpartum as a long-term thing. There's no way to be able to definitively prevent that. during pregnancy. So there's so many different reasons why you might end up with a diastasis that it is hard to say that there's one thing to change or do differently or not. So, oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm still trying to get out of screen share and it's just not happening and I'm getting really frustrated. All right, so there's no way to know for sure whether or not you're going to have a diastasis postpartum, and there's no way to definitively prevent it during pregnancy. That being said, there are studies that show that staying active can help prevent future diastasis. There's also studies that show that people that have particularly strong obliques might be more at risk for diastasis, right? So there's a lot of studies. They give us a lot of different information. So again, there's no one correct answer. What you can do during pregnancy that will benefit your body long-term and help you recover postpartum, whether or not you have a diastasis, are stay active. You can work on, so that means that like continue any activities that you are comfortable with. So pregnancy is not the time to start a new hobby, right? If you had never tried aerial, you shouldn't start doing aerial when you're pregnant. But if you we're training consistently, you can continue training as long as you don't have any high risk factors. So if you have a high risk pregnancy, if you have a history of miscarriage, of course you should stop doing any of this stuff and just focus on staying healthy. But if you don't have any risk factors, you can continue activities that you're comfortable with as long as you feel comfortable and safe. Right? So pregnant people tend to know pretty definitively, like, I am not comfortable doing this thing anymore. And that is the most important thing to pay attention to, is how you feel, whether or not you feel comfortable doing training. Of course, waist straps are going to become problematic pretty early on. So, you know, avoid those as you start feeling growing in your belly a little bit. And inverting might start feeling really uncomfortable. It does for some people. So, you know, just pay attention to what your body is telling you. The big things to watch out for are a feeling of tugging along the front of your belly. So the linea alba, which is the connective tissue that I pointed out, that runs from your ribs to your pubic bone. This guy here on the front of your body. If you feel a sense of tugging that goes along that line, that is a strong indication that you should stop that activity for the rest of your pregnancy. You might feel that tugging when you're doing something like a pull-up or an inversion, something that's really putting a lot of load and strain on the front of your body. So that would be an indication that it is time to stop that. Let's see. And then generally avoid abdominal specific exercises, right? So no more abs while you're pregnant. You can work on gentle transversus activation. So your transversus is this lowest layer of abdominal muscle that wraps all the way around from your belly, essentially to your spine. And if you look at the muscle fibers of it, they run around your waist like a corset. And so the way this muscle works is by tightening, drawing in. So you, if you're practicing a transversus contraction, you might feel like you are trying to hug your baby with your muscles. and then relaxing that hug. But more than that, any sort of like ab specific work, generally best to be avoided. And that is one of the few things that would probably make a diastasis worse. So there was a thing that I was just about to say and it fell out of my brain. So work your arms and legs, right? You can work on your joints of your shoulders and your hips. You can work on your postural muscles. So like all the muscles in your back here. These guys are all great to work on while you're pregnant. And this will help mitigate some of the things that we see postpartum. But generally, just try to stay as active as you feel comfortable and stay healthy, right? Like that's the most important thing when you're pregnant. So let's move on. Oh, miscarriage. So I did get a question about miscarriage and how this, a miscarried pregnancy applies to this stuff. The biggest question there is how far along they were. So if somebody, most miscarriages happen, you know, in the first 3 months or so, and a miscarriage at that point, there would be virtually no postpartum symptoms associated with that because the baby didn't grow large enough to start creating this pressure. So if it was farther along, if they were showing and starting to have more growth in the belly, then there might be some mild postpartum effects, but it would really depend on how far along the pregnancy was. All right, so diving in to postpartum. This is still driving me crazy. All right, diving into postpartum. What has happened? So all of these parts that we talked about have gotten thrown out of their regular alignment, right? So your ribs got all flared and opened out. Right? Because you had a baby pushing up on them here. So your ribs kind of opened out like an umbrella almost. So stretched out at the bottom. And that causes your diaphragm to get stretched out and flattened kind of like pancake. Maybe now? No? All right. And when your ribs when your diaphragm gets flattened out like that, it inhibits your ability to breathe well. So let's see if I can, there we go. We're gonna look just a little bit at respiration here. So when we're breathing well, we have all of these muscles that help to lift the ribs on the sides, right? So your serratus, your pec minor, your sternocleidomastoid and scalenes, and right, you don't need to remember these muscle names. But the most important one is your diaphragm, which is this guy on the bottom. And if you look at this, you'll see how the diaphragm, when it's working, is actually pulling down this way. And that is what is filling your lungs with air. And these muscles here are what we call secondary inspirators, right? You can't see my screen now. Oh my gosh. What is going on with Zoom? All right. You can't, can you see me now?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. This is killing me today, guys. Sorry. All right. So now our ribs have gotten pulled down and out, right? So it is not uncommon after you have had a baby to have your bra size go up a couple band sizes because your ribs have gotten flared out. This affects how your diaphragm works, right? So when your diaphragm is flat, it is stretched and it can't pull down. So you start relying on these secondary muscles here to do the work of breathing, lifting your ribs up. And that can contribute to things like having a lot of neck and shoulder tension all through your upper body. So that's one thing. Another thing that has happened is your abs got all stretched out, right? They were just sitting under tension and load for 6 months, more and more stress as your baby's growing. And they're working really hard, right? So the reason why we don't do abdominal work when you're pregnant is because your abs are already working really hard to like exist, right? They're so stretched out. And they're trying not to like fly off your body with all of this pressure that's coming from the inside. So we don't want to work them any harder than they're already working. And after you've had your baby, a big part of your work is getting them back to a more neutral length and helping them start to regain some tone and strength. And then your pelvis, right, and your pelvic floor. So whether or not you have had a vaginal birth, your pelvic floor can still have issues from pregnancy because there's so much pressure down into the bottom of your pelvis. And likewise, your pelvis is getting spread apart by all of this force from your baby, more so if you had a vaginal delivery, but even without, there's still all this force down on your pelvis. You've got all this relaxant in your system, which can stress and stretch the joints, right? So you can still have pelvic floor dysfunction even with a C-section, just like you can have a vaginal birth and have no pelvic floor dysfunction afterwards. And it is quite common to have some hip issue and dysfunction postpartum as well. As we said earlier, the pelvic floor and the hips are mooshed together. All right, so diastasis is the big thing that we're talking about today. So diastasis is this separation at the linea alba. So, man, I have some other stuff that I want to share, but now I'm afraid that I won't get back out of it. That's okay. So diastasis is separation of the linea alba. You can have diastasis in a few different ways. You can be separated at the top of the ribs, which is the most common, kind of like right below your rib cage. It can be right at your belly button, or it can be in your low abdominals between your belly button and your pubic bone, or it could be a combination of any two or all three. You get a diastasis for a number of different reasons. It's usually an indication that you're putting stress and strain on the linea alba because of how your posture is changed. Or it's an indication that you're not managing pressure well. And we'll talk more about pressure management as we get into recovery stuff. You didn't do anything wrong if you got a diastasis, and just know that it is like everybody's abdominals separate during pregnancy. That's part of it. It is uncommon for your abdominals to not separate during pregnancy. And most women who continue to have separation of the abdominals postpartum, it will naturally come back together over time. So I can't remember the statistics, but the majority of people after a year have had their abdominals come back together. So in order to fix it, you have to start addressing that alignment issues, right? And your pressure management. And we'll get more into that. One of the symptoms of diastasis is a bulging or a doming that happens right in the center of your abdominals. And Zoom isn't letting me see myself. So hopefully you can see me when I point at my belly. And this is one of the pictures that I wanted to show you, but we'll figure it out. So how do you check for a diastasis? And this is good stuff. So you're gonna, and you guys can all try this right now. You can lay down on your back. If you're pregnant, don't do it. Don't worry about it. You're gonna lay down on your back and you're gonna take 2 fingers and you're gonna find a spot kind of right between your belly button and the base of your ribs and gently press down. And then you're gonna lift just your head up. You can let your head and your upper shoulders kind of float off the ground. So diastasis is if your fingers kind of sink in, if you feel a separation and your fingers drop into that hole. Let your head come down and then try at your belly button. Lift your head up, let your fingers hunt around. If there's a separation, you know it's there. And then you can try again between your belly button and pubic bone. So that's how you check for a diastasis. A diastasis that is 1 finger width or less is not considered a diastasis technically. 1 finger or more to 2 is a moderate diastasis, and 3 or more fingers is a severe diastasis. So this is a good thing to be able to check on your own. And this is something that can change throughout your postpartum period. So you might have separation at the beginning and then it goes away naturally. And conversely, you might not have a lot of separation, and then it might get worse depending on what's going on with your body and what activities you're doing. So these things are not set in stone and they can totally change. So other issues that you can have postpartum with your pelvic floor, you can have incontinence, right? And that can range from, you know, peeing a little bit when you sneeze to being unable to hold it. And often, if you're really struggling with incontinence, it means that you are pushing yourself a little bit too hard, too fast. It is not unusual to see incontinence with postpartum runners who really push themselves to get back to running a little bit too quickly. And I had a client who was telling me about how she had been getting back to running. And I was like, oh yeah, well, how's your pelvic floor doing? And she literally like burst out, laugh crying, and was like, how did you know? And 4 days ago had just had an accident while running. So we backed things up, and now she can run for miles at a time and she's fine. Your pelvic floor can become hypertonic, which means it's too tight and stays tight all the time, or it can be hypotonic, which means that it struggles to retain tone and to contract, right? Both are signs of weakness, conversely, or weirdly. You might think that a muscle that is constantly under tension is going to be stronger, but it is actually becomes weaker when it holds tension for too much time, right? So, so both are not great. The worst thing would be prolapse, where your abdominal or your pelvic floor can no longer support your organs and they start to fall down. And a lot of what we're talking about with postpartum recovery is helping to avoid prolapse. So prolapse can feel like a sense of heaviness or fullness in the bottom of your pelvis. And that is something that you 100% need to go see a pelvic floor physical therapist for. The recovery, everything that we're going to talk about as far as recovery goes, is the same for prolapse, right? Like all of this stuff will be the same. It's just the level of care and awareness that you need to be taking with it. If you are, have a relatively normal postpartum recovery, you can work on this stuff, with some awareness. And if you're struggling with a severe diastasis or prolapse, then you need to be working on this stuff with like 100% focus and awareness. If you had a C-section, so, as I said, all of these postpartum things can be the same for somebody with a C-section versus somebody with a vaginal birth, including pelvic floor issues. But if you had a C-section, you're adding a few weeks of recovery time because you had abdominal surgery, right? So it's just more to recover from. With a C-section, their considerations are scar tissue and trying to keep your scar tissue mobile so after you've recovered and after your scar is healed, then you want to be looking at mobilizing the tissue so that, because scar tissue can become kind of rigid. So there's a bunch of different techniques that you can look at for scar tissue mobilization. Skin rolling is a thing that you can look up and check out, which is basically just taking your skin and rolling it back and forth, which can help break up scar tissue and adhesion. If you work on a bar apparatus, your C-section scar is usually right at your front balance scar. So that, right at your front balance place. So that can be interesting and a little uncomfortable. But if you can get through the discomfort, it is a great way to mobilize scar tissue. There is also sometimes a loss of sensation connected to abdominal surgery. So, and a loss of like neurological connection. So it is sometimes when people have abdominal surgery of any sort, whether or not it was a C-section, they lose feeling to their abdominals or a part of their abdominals, and they lose some ability to control contraction in parts of their abdominals. So these are definitely things that you can work on and find somebody to work on with you. And they are not common things, so you shouldn't be afraid of getting a C-section if that's what you need. But they are things that can happen and things to be aware of. So I think that's most of kind of the what's going on potentially with postpartum. So we can move on to recovery. And if you have any questions about any of that postpartum stuff, go ahead and ask them. But we'll move on to recovery. So your recovery time, right? In the US, basically a doctor will tell you, all right, you're 6 weeks, go live your life as normal. And that's kind of a load of crap. So if you're in the US, I'm sure you realize that medical care around pregnancy and postpartum is a little lacking. And if you're not in the US, just be thankful. So that 6 weeks that they're talking about is basically the amount of time that it takes your body to recover from the trauma of childbirth, right? The childbirth is a traumatic event, right? It's huge. You grew a thing, you're pushing it out, and it has a huge impact on your body. So the 6 weeks is the amount of time it takes for your body to kind of recover from that. And you're going to add a few weeks onto that if you had a C-section, right? Because of, surgical healing. As far as recovering, your postpartum recovery period, you should expect it to last for about a year. More or less, depending on your specific body, your pregnancy, your birth, etc. But the thing with postpartum recovery is that you really want to be taking it incrementally. So if you push yourself really hard, you have more likelihood of something cropping up, creating a diastasis, creating pelvic floor issues because you were putting force and load into your body that it wasn't prepared for, and it had to, work its way out some way. So you are at greater risk of creating an issue that maybe you didn't have already, or worsening an issue that you had if you push your recovery faster than your body is prepared to handle it. So give yourself that year timeline in your mind, just so you don't have, you're not disappointed if it's been 6 months and you still don't feel normal again. So you're also considered postpartum forever, right? So if you've ever had a baby, you're postpartum. And even though you might recover fully from childbirth and not have any symptoms or, anything that goes along with that, you're still considered postpartum, FYI. So how to start your recovery process. So the first thing that you need to look at is this internal system, right? So we looked at the diaphragm, we looked at the abdominals and the transversus. Oh, you are very welcome. I know it can feel a little overwhelming. So diaphragm, transversus, and the rest of your abdominals, and then pelvic floor at the bottom. So this is creating this like internal unit of stability, right? I don't know if you guys read the Circus Doc. Emily Sherb published a blog post a week or two ago called The Canister of Support or something like that, talking about abdominal support. And this is exactly what she was talking about, was this inner unit. In Pilates, we call it the inner unit or the powerhouse. And you can think about it being like a canister, right? You have your transversus, which is the walls of the canister. You have your spine, which is supporting those walls. And then you have your diaphragm and your pelvic floor as the top and the bottom. Inside of that canister is all of your internal organs, right? And a baby, if you grew a baby. So what all of this stuff does is create support and stability for the rest of your muscles and bones to be supported by, right? Like this is the foundation that the rest of your body kind of is supported by. And there's something called intra-abdominal pressure that is created in this unit when everything is functioning well. So what happens is we have that diaphragm on the top, we have the pelvic floor on the bottom. When you inhale and everything is working well, your diaphragm pulls down, right, as your ribs expand. And that exerts pressure down onto your organs, which in turn exerts pressure down onto your pelvic floor. And your pelvic floor should relax. When you exhale, right, your diaphragm lifts up and it's pulling pressure up, right? All that pressure that was just down gets lifted and your pelvic floor should contract. Now, this should happen automatically, this kind of dance of pressure. We shouldn't have to think about it. It is something that our body is designed to do. But when something in the system gets thrown out of whack, like you're not breathing in such a way that your diaphragm is pulling down, or if you've got pelvic floor issues, or if you have a diastasis, right, and there's a hole in the walls of the canister, then these things can get all mushy, and that's what happens when you're pregnant and when you're postpartum. So step one to recovering is to fix that system. So when I work with people, and if you were to like do an online program, and I'll make some recommendations for online programs, all of these, different people that you work with or different programs that you sign up for are probably going to start with a focus on breathing and restoring your breath function. And what you might find is that you might not have been breathing well even before you got pregnant, because honestly, most people don't, right? So if you're a person who carries a lot of tension in your chest and upper shoulders and neck, it might be because you are breathing by lifting your ribs up this way rather than expanding them this way. You might also, if you're somebody who's always getting yelled at about pulling your ribs in by your coach, right? It might be because you breathe by lifting your ribs up and down this way rather than expanding them out to the side. So it's super common to see people with dysfunctional breathing patterns who have never had children. But 99% of people who have had children show some sort of dysfunction in their breathing. So step one is learning how to breathe into your back and sides and keep connection through your abdominals while you're breathing, and connect that to your pelvic floor. So you can try a little breath thing if you are postpartum and if you do not have any serious pelvic floor issues. So if you have prolapse, you should not do this. But we're just going to do a little test. And I want you to take your hand and put it kind of around your belly button or slightly lower. And you're going to take a deep breath in, and then you're going to blow out. And I want you to blow out a little bit hard. And you can try that a couple of times. And what you're feeling for with your hand is whether or not, as you exhale, you have a sense of pushing down and your belly bulging out into your hand, or whether or not you feel your abdominals tightening and a sense of lifting up as you exhale. So try it or not, and feel free to turn on your mic and tell me how it went, or ask a question, or drop it in the chat. That bulging is you not regulating your pressure well. So that is the big thing that you are trying to fix first with your recovery. And connected to that is allowing your ribs to move with your breath as well. Because when we're feeling a bulge, it's probably because we have started breathing by lifting our rib cage or lifting our upper ribs and not breathing into the sides of our back. Now you can try again, taking a deep breath, and this time as you exhale, and do this exhale a little gently, can you exhale and imagine you're like a tube of toothpaste and you're exhaling from the bottom up? And you can even think about adding a little bit of a pelvic floor contraction to that and see if that felt a little different. Hopefully, you felt a little more abdominal contraction while you were doing that. So retraining your body how to breathe in that more natural, expansive breath pattern is step one. Adding into that is your pelvic floor and how your pelvic floor functions with your breath. So we're often, told by our healthcare providers that, you should just do Kegels to repair your pelvic floor after birth. And I know I certainly thought I was supposed to just try to hold a Kegel all the time. And I've known a lot of other people who have thought, oh, you're just trying to Kegel all the time. And that's not true, right? What we are really trying to do is restore the function of the pelvic floor with the diaphragm. So that means being able to contract, but also being able to relax. And pelvic floor strength is not necessarily, that's not necessarily the thing that's missing if you have a little bit of postpartum incontinence, right? Like I always sneezed or peed a little bit when I sneezed for many, many years, but my pelvic floor was pretty strong. I didn't have any issues with it, right? I could create a very strong contraction and relax it. So if you're suffering from some amount of incontinence, the issue is probably more related to how your breathing and your pelvic floor work together versus just pelvic floor strength alone. And here's my personal anecdote about this. I did have a child when I was very young, before I had any of my education around any of these topics. And I peed a little bit when I sneezed. I thought that was normal, right? I think we are all kind of expect things like that, and that's just the way it is with your postpartum body. I was, basically able to do whatever, right? I didn't have any limitations on my physical capabilities. Although I don't have a reference for what my adult body felt like without being postpartum because I was so young when I had my son. So I've been postpartum for my entire adult life. So I'm sure that I had some residual abdominal weakness that I just didn't know that it was supposed to feel any different. But when I went to start do my Pilates instructor training, I was taught how to breathe correctly, right? So taught how to maintain some connection through my abdominals and expand into the back of my ribs. And I stopped peeing when I sneezed. It just went away. One day I realized that had ceased to happen. And I, at the time, was like, oh, wow, Pilates really is magical. And it wasn't until I did my further in education around postpartum issues that I learned that it was actually because I had been able to fix my breathing, which was the last piece in my body that was still a little bit out of whack after having a baby. And when I fixed that piece, my body was able to heal and recover completely. And I have no further residual issues from childbirth. So if you have even just a little bit of stuff going on in your body still, sometimes it really is that simple as just fixing that one last piece. Not for everybody, but. So as you are learning how to control your breath, part of what you're also learning is how to control that bulging and doming. And all right, now I am gonna try to share. All right, so we're gonna look at some abdominal doming here. And this is the thing that you're really watching out for, is this sort of bulging out through the front of your belly during abdominal exercises or any type of exercise, right? This is the pressure that we're talking about. And if you're having bulging or doming like this, it's a really strong indicator that what you are doing, whatever you're doing physically in that moment, is not something that your body is prepared to be doing. So these domes and bulges are all, oh, this one is nice because it's showing you how the doming changes when you've connected your transversus versus when you are only using your rectus. So the doming is an indication that you're not managing your pressure and that you're overloading your abdominals. And now I can't stop the share again. Oh well. Then we can look at some pictures of diastasis too. So here are some pictures of diastasis. Yours may or may not look like this. And your diastasis might not ever come all the way together, but you might be considered recovered. And here's a nice picture of like different places that a diastasis might manifest. It's actually working. Great. All right. So that doming and bulging is the big first thing that you're watching out for. Can you control your breathing and control the bulge while you're starting to add a little bit of load to your abdominals? And then, so pelvic floor, if you have more complicated pelvic floor issues than just maybe a little bit of weakness and retraining your pelvic floor to work with your diaphragm, then you definitely want to be working with a PT. Pelvic floors are super complicated. But if everything's feeling manageable, then you're thinking about how your pelvic floor works with your diaphragm. Can I screen share my images? Was I not screen sharing them? All right. I don't know. Zoom is being a huge pain today. All right. And then while you're working with your pelvic floor and your breathing, you also need to be looking at starting to restore function of your hip. So when we had all that pressure down into the bottom of our pelvis, hip function can be affected. We tend to lose internal rotation when we're pregnant. So restoring that rotation of the hip and connecting it to how the pelvic floor works are like the big key points there. So once you can kind of control that pressure, then you can start looking at adding load to your core. And we're thinking like super duper gentle, like laying on your back. Can you lift one foot while you're managing that pressure and put it down? Can you lift the other foot, manage that pressure and put it down? And from there, you know, reaching farther out through your leg, right? Like that's how you load your abdominals, is just by making your legs longer and lower to the floor. but managing the pressure is, there's no screen share. I don't know what's going on, guys. Sorry. All right. And then once you're able to load your, like while you're working on loading your core, you're also working on restoring your posture, right? So when you're pregnant, right, we talked about you tend to get that excessive arch through your low back. You tend to get that excessive rounding through your upper spine. And your upper spine, your thoracic spine will get really stiff easily, right? It's already stiff because it's connected to your rib cage. So it's not supposed to move a whole lot. And we talk about that all the time in circus specifically, right? Like I can't move my upper back. I don't have, my upper back isn't very flexible. So know that it's never going to be particularly flexible, but you are looking to restore all of the individual movement at each joint. So for me, right, I have a relatively mobile upper spine. When I go into extension, it looks like that, right? My upper back just kind of gets flat from round to flat. And that's your goal for thoracic extension, being able to do that without it being just your ribs lifting up and down. Your back kind of stayed round and your rib cage just kind of popped up and lowered again. So restoring movement of your upper spine, which is going to be working on rotational movements, working on opening up your chest, getting these muscles to relax a little bit, and strengthening these muscles right in the middle of your back. And, you know, we're also probably carrying a baby around all the time, which is further pulling us into this position. So all the more important to get those muscles working to help hold you upright. Now, lucky for all of us who are also hoping to get back to aerial, strengthening those muscles are exactly what you need to be doing to prepare your upper body to get back to being in the air, right? So we're looking, when you're doing that, you're looking at supporting your scapula, you're looking at restoring shoulder range of motion, and those are exactly the things that you need to be doing as you're getting ready to get back in the air. So it's great. It works out for everyone. Now, also remember how much, or more precisely, how little time you probably have to be devoting to this if we get back to that year timeline of recovery. If you have a small person to care for, right, you're not going to have a lot of time to be exercising and doing various fitness things. So, you know, be gentle with yourself, have reasonable expectations, and also make sure that you are still taking time for yourself, for self-care. I know it's really easy when you have a new baby or even a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, to think that all of your focus and attention needs to be on caring for that person. But remember, you cannot take care of them if you're not taking care of yourself. So do try to find, you know, a few hours every week that you can carve out for yourself. The other thing with rebuilding your posture, the other consideration there is that you have all of this residual joint laxity from all of the relaxin that went into your system during pregnancy. And if you're breastfeeding, then that relaxin sticks around for a while, basically until you're done breastfeeding. So you might have some excess laxity for quite a while. Even if you don't breastfeed, it does hang out in your body for a while postpartum. And that laxity might have changed some of your joints permanently. So I had a friend who had never hyperextended joints before, elbows or knees didn't hyperextend. And during her second pregnancy, she was working out with me, and she came in to do a session, and I'm like, why are your elbows hyperextending? Why are your knees hyperextending, right? They had just started because of the laxity in her joints. And they continue to be a little bit susceptible to hyperextension now, even though she's 2 years postpartum, right? So sometimes those changes to your connective tissue last forever. So when you're looking at restoring your posture, part of that is going to be stabilizing your joints that might have changed during your pregnancy, and teaching your muscles to support those joints again, or in a way that might be new. So it's something to watch out for. And you're going to see it most commonly in like knees and elbows. You might also feel it, right? Like if you're carrying heavy groceries, you might feel like a weird tugging on your elbow that you'd never experienced before. And that can come from like the excess laxity in your joints. So yeah, so your first part of recovery is really focusing on restoring your breath and the function of your diaphragm, reconnecting your abdominals in a way that they can control pressure with the support of your pelvic floor. Now you can start working on things like breathing pretty soon after birth, right? And working on things like doing really gentle opening movements through the upper body to get a little bit of movement through that upper back, gentle hip movements. Don't start trying to load anything, right? You're not trying to do anything hard, but reconnecting with your breath, bringing a little gentle movement into some of these major joints is something that you can start doing very carefully and cautiously, 2 or so weeks postpartum. But again, like this shouldn't be a workout. This should feel like rolling around on your floor essentially and taking deep breaths. 6 weeks are when you're cleared by your healthcare professional, right? Remember, if you had a C-section, it might be longer. Is when you can start working on the stuff with a little more intention and focus. So your diastasis, if you have it, may not ever fully come all the way back together. As I said, width of a finger or less is no longer considered to be a diastasis. And what you're really feeling for, if you remember your diastasis test, is there might be a little bit of separation, but is it firm underneath, right? So that firmness, if it feels firm and maybe a little bouncy, then that tells us that you're getting the support through your transversus, right? That is all working to hold you in. And even though there might still be a little bit of residual separation, your abdominals are basically functioning normally. So that is the point where you can really go back to normal. And with maybe a little bit of mental awareness for what's happening down there. So if you have continued to have abdominal separation, and you can have abdominal separation for a really long time if you have never done anything to address it. If you're 5 years postpartum and you're like, oh man, I've got a diastasis, you can start working on it now. There is never a wrong time to start addressing your diastasis. And you can make progress on it at any point in time. Just being aware that if you're 5 years postpartum and you still have a tiny bit of separation, but you check and it feels firm, right? You shouldn't be restricting yourself from doing anything. You're probably fine to go back to your regular activities, again, with some mental awareness of how everything's working. And that brings us to getting back to training, right? How do you know if you're ready to return to training? And this is going to be, of course, different for everybody, and entirely dependent on what your pregnancy and recovery were like. But I would say the important things to be paying attention to, if we're thinking about the rigors of aerial training, right? Even if you're doing really basic stuff, it's still pretty intense. So think about, what are you asking your body to do, right? In general, we're asking our body to hang fully extended. So even just the act of hanging is a fair amount of load into this front line of our abdominals. So step one is, are you able to maintain that abdominal connection under that extreme load? So I would be looking at things like, can you extend your legs straight up to the ceiling, laying on your back, and maintain your good pressure regulation and connection through your abdominals? And can you start slowly lowering your legs down towards the floor? Maybe not trying to get all the way to legs right above the floor like a hollow body hold, but thinking about moving your legs slightly lower and lower and still being able to maintain that good abdominal contraction. Can you reach your arms all the way over your head and maintain that good abdominal contraction, right? So you should be able to do these things and still take deep, full breaths, feeling the back of your ribs expand. If you can't do that, if you can't lift your arms all the way up without having bulging, and this is for all postpartum people, whether or not you have a diastasis, right? Because we're all going to have these same symptoms of bulging and doming, regardless of whether or not you have the separation. The separation is just a larger manifestation of dysfunction, but we're all going to be experiencing some of these similar symptoms regardless. So you should be able to lift your arms all the way overhead, being able to take deep, full breaths into the back of your ribs and maintaining good abdominal connection and pressure. And you should be able to lift your legs straight up to the ceiling and allow them to come lower to the ground while not necessarily trying to go all the way down. And be able to take deep, full breaths while you hold that. And then when you are returning to the air, we're looking at loading slowly to this, right? So when I have worked with postpartum women coming back to training, the things that I'm having them do first are like hang with your feet on the floor, right? So holding onto a fabric or a rope or a trapeze, where you can still have your feet resting on the ground, and start gently lifting one leg and then the other, right? Can you do that? Can you add all that extra pressure or intensity into your system and still manage your pressure? Can you maintain that connection while you're doing really basic things? So like thinking about climbing is a lot of stuff going on in your body, right? So your arms are all the way up, you're pulling your knees up in front of your body. You go into a bit of a crunch when you do that, right? And if you are still struggling with your diastasis, that crunch can be pulling your abdominals apart. So you need to be able to manage all that pressure, hold good connection, to even be able to start doing something super basic like climbing in a way that is not going to be making things worse for you. So again, if you didn't have a diastasis, you can probably, right, like be a little less rigorous about all of this. If you did have a diastasis, it's something you need to be really 100% focused on for a while. And if you had prolapse, then even more so, real 100% focus on being perfect in your movement for a period of time, right? Until that control becomes automatic, something that you don't have to be actively paying attention to. And then as you are more and more recovered, you don't need to be 100% perfect all of the time. You have more wiggle room in and out, but you need to establish that baseline of control. Exercises to avoid while postpartum, during your initial postpartum recovery, we probably all know that crunches are bad for diastasis. What we're really looking at is anything that's overly loading the front line of your body, so your rectus abdominis primarily, but also, the rest of your abs as well, in such a way that you can't maintain that feeling of wrapping in and contraction through your center, right? So anytime you're feeling that sense of pressure out or bulging, that would be a sign that it's time to stop. And you're going to feel that with crunches. You're going to feel that with fully loaded planks too soon. You're going to feel that with hanging too soon. You're going to feel that with too much load from the legs too soon. And you also might feel it from like lifting heavy things, right? So often postpartum women get injuries from like putting their babies in and out of cars, leaning over the crib to lift them up, things like that. So those are all things to be aware of. And any good postpartum recovery plan is going to be focused on restoring functional movement. So think like squats and hip hinges and being able to lift your arms up and down to grab things and lift things. Like that's going to be the focus, is like getting you functional for your daily life. And then you should be, if you're doing something like an online course, you should be focusing on that stuff first, right? Because that is, even though it doesn't feel aerial specific, those are all of the things that you need in order to be able to start adding the aerial specific stuff, right? So you should be able to squat and hinge at your hips well, in order to be able to do aerial. So focusing on all that basic day-to-day life stuff. I know often people who get involved in aerial and circus are like, want to push themselves and be high achieving, or maybe you're coming from a really highly athletic and capable pre-pregnancy place, and being, taking things slowly and working on really basic tasks or things that don't seem like they're specific to your goals can feel challenging or disappointing. And we also tend to want to push ourselves really hard. And this is the place where you want to really step back and take time and work on these basic movements and skills, because it really does apply to what your body is going to be capable of doing in the air. And as soon as you're able to like hold, load, right, like squat holding a load, you're going to be able to start loading your abdominals so that you can lift your legs up in front of you, right? So yeah, that's the big general overview of when do you know it's safe to return to training. So if you have any questions about that, now is the time. I mean, there'll be time later too, but you're going to unmute yourself or pop them in the chat. All right, so, and then what can you do to recover, right? Where do you find resources or help? So if you have a severe diastasis, if you're having pelvic floor issues, you should absolutely be working with a PT. There are great pelvic floor PTs out there all over the world. You can work with the PT even if you're not having severe issues, because every postpartum person needs some sort of corrective care, right? And this is, as I was saying, this is the thing that's really missing in the US. Not a lot of people are talking about like what you need to do to fully restore the function of your body postpartum. And every person really should go through some sort of postpartum specific corrective care work after pregnancy and birth. So if you're having serious issues, please seek the help of a physical therapist. You can also work one-on-one with a specialist. So somebody like me who has more extensive training around these issues and can look at you and see what you're doing and give you feedback and specific things based on what's happening and what your goals are. And then there's also a bunch of online courses that are available. There's some really excellent courses out there. So the ones that I specifically would recommend are Core Exercise Solutions, and I'll send links out. So Core Exercise Solutions is the postpartum corrective exercise training that I have done. And it's a course that is designed by a physical therapist and who has experienced diastasis. So she's got a bunch of really great free resources that you can check out, as well as like an online course that you can go through as a participant. And then also on her site would be like all of the people that have gone through her certification if you were looking for somebody to work with personally one-on-one. There's another great program called Restore Your Core, which I don't have any personal experience with, but people that I know have gone through the course to become a practitioner and have experience with it, their online course for participants. And it comes highly recommended to me. And then there's another course, again, that was recommended to me that's specifically about pelvic organ prolapse called Pop Uplifting. And so this is, really specific to the pelvic floor, whereas Core Exercise Solutions and Restore Your Core are a little more general, getting a little bit of everything, diastasis, pelvic floor, and core support generally. Pop Uplifting is for prolapse. So if you're dealing with prolapse, that was the online resource that I found, and it did come recommended to me from a colleague. So, so those are the online resources that I would check out. Other things that you can do, right? Like Pilates is a great general fitness thing. The thing that is great about Pilates and postpartum is it's really, the system is really based on all this stuff that we were talking about. Can you support your core and move your parts? Right? And Pilates is really focused on that structural balance, right? Restoring your posture and strengthening your postural muscles, being able to move and breathe at the same time. If you're doing Pilates, if you choose to do that, just be aware that, either you should be looking for somebody who does have some specific postpartum education that you can work with a little bit one-on-one first before joining more of a class setting, or work with somebody outside of Pilates who can help you learn your breathing and that abdominal connection. And then when you go to your Pilates class, you're applying those things when you're doing your workout, and that is your focus. Can I do all this stuff while still maintaining this connection through my core? And that goes the same for any physical training that you would be doing postpartum. Like, can you control your core and create good pressure while you're working out? So bottom line, that's your goal. All right, so that is basically my outline. I tried to answer as many questions as I could that I got from people beforehand. But if you have more questions, now is the time. And I'm going to just take a peek and see if there's any questions. Oh, here's a good one. Somebody asked me to explain queefs with inversions. So if you tend to queef, which is, getting some air in your vagina, and then it getting pushed out when you go upside down, that is usually a symptom of pelvic floor weakness. So then I would be focusing on integrating that pelvic floor contraction with your exhalation and spending some time focusing on that. It is something that you might want to check in with a pelvic floor PT, especially if you're having other pelvic floor symptoms, too much tightness, a feeling like you can't contract it at all, or if you're noticing weird hip issues, especially if they're asymmetrical, or you feel the sensation in your pelvic floor is asymmetrical. That would be a sign to check in with a PT. But otherwise, just thinking about, can you get a good contraction with that strong exhalation? All right, so great question here. I'm thinking about getting pregnant in the next year, and obviously would talk to doctor and aerial coach, but can you speak a little bit about drops on silks? Are those pretty much off the table during pregnancy? So I would say the farther into your pregnancy you go, the more and more they are off the table. Like within that first month or two, especially if you don't know that you're pregnant, right? Like a lot of us didn't realize we were pregnant until we were like a month or two along. Probably you're fine. You are very welcome. Yeah, thanks for coming. So probably you're fine within that first month or two if you're doing big drops. But as soon as you know you're pregnant, I would probably avoid doing anything with a fair amount of hit on the bottom. And you're going to very quickly not want to do drops because it's going to feel really uncomfortable in your body as soon as you have any sort of growth in your belly. So you will, you'll just be like, oh no, that's a terrible idea, and you won't want to do it. So somebody had asked a question about a student who had their abs, had a full separation, and then they came back together, and they can no longer tuck under the bar, even though their arms are technically long enough to be able to do it. I would say for that, it's likely that they lost the ability to have some active compression. So that ability to like get and stay really small actively. Maybe their low back doesn't flex as much as it used to. Maybe they lost some hamstring flexibility. Those are all really common things during pregnancy. And I would just focus on, strengthening abdominals, trying to get more lumbar flexion, trying to be able to flex the low back more, and work on that active compression to be able to really actively pull the knees into the chest and get as small as possible. And, maybe it'll come back. Maybe it won't. There might also be some shoulder stuff. They might have lost the ability to protract, right? So working on mobility of the shoulders and how the scapula are working could help with that. And then what signs should we look for either as a coach or in your own body to spot postpartum, maybe that it's not safe for your student to be back training? So really look out for that bulge. That's the big thing to watch out for. And if apparently I wasn't screen sharing during that when I was showing those pictures, so you should search for abdominal doming. and look at pictures of that. And that would be the big thing. If they have a diastasis, the doming is going to be really specific, maybe all along the front, and it might even just be in one specific spot along the front line of the body. Yeah. And I had a question about weight loss as well. And the thing that I'll say about weight loss, I'm not a weight loss coach. If you are breastfeeding, you shouldn't worry about weight loss. You have a second person to feed with your body, right? So you need all your calories. Also, your body is biologically trying to get and maintain calories. So if you're actively trying to lose weight, you're going to be like, your body's going to be like, what the shit is going on, right? And it might even be counterproductive. You might end up storing more fat because your body thinks that there's a famine and it needs to hold on to as many calories as possible if you are starting to restrict calories while you're breastfeeding, right? So while you're breastfeeding, don't worry about it. And if you breastfeed, some studies show that if you breastfeed past a year, then that will actually automatically help with weight loss. Your body's like, oh, hey, we don't need to store all this fat anymore. And it starts turning that fat into milk. So there are some signs that long-term breastfeeding can help with weight loss. No rules, of course. For safe and sane weight loss recommendations, I would say check out Precision Nutrition, and I'll include this information in the links. They have a really smart and well-rounded approach to weight loss, but weight loss is calorie restriction. That's it. That's how you lose weight. And so just being mindful about how much you're limiting your calorie intake. And if you are postpartum, you probably want to be really minimal about that calorie reduction. But Precision Nutrition is a great resource. And they also train people, so you can look at their website to find somebody to work with if that is one of your goals. All right. So if there's any other questions, please feel free. I don't even know if any of you are left because I can't see anything anymore because Zoom is broken. And you can also unmute yourself and ask as well. At least one person's here. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And of course, if you are interested in my help, feel free, like this is something I can help you with. So you can shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you more about this. I also have an online course that's getting started on Monday that is not postpartum specific. But if you are in a place where you have, good pressure regulation and you're ready to start gaining core strength control, stability, mobility, all of those things, my course would be really great and helpful for that. And I can totally talk to you about how you'd be wanting to think about it as a postpartum person. You can check that out on my website, which is laurenkale.com. And yeah, if you have any questions, just get in touch and I would love to talk to you about it. All right. Thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye. See if I can quit this now. There we go.